indeed. Let's give him a nice round of applause. Yes, indeed. That was after 6 bottles of Jack Daniels, 2 bottles of wine, and 6 bottles of Tidy Ball. Ladies and gentlemen, purely raw talent, as you can see. The William Morris Agency has just called over the phone, and that's the biggest talent agency in the country, and they've asked me to inform that this group not give up their day jobs. Ladies and gentlemen, we have from California a fine singer. Oh, terrific. Yeah, what a crowd.
It is 8 a.m. on a Monday morning at the Louisa Street Wharf in New Orleans. President Ronald Reagan's oldest son, 37-year-old Michael Reagan, is hoping this day will be better than the day before. He is here testing 2 38-foot Scarab race boats for what could be the most grueling 24 hours of his life. In 2 days, Reagan, heading a crew of 5 men, will be racing the offshore power boats up the Mississippi River to St. Louis, Missouri, a trip more than 1,000 miles long to raise $500,000 for the U.S. Olympic Committee and to try and break the world record time for this trek of 26 hours, 50 minutes. So far, the testing has not gone well. There has been trouble with the boat Reagan hopes will be his primary boat in the race, a twin-engine turbo-diesel racing machine.
We've had some small problems, but that's to be expected. This is really, this boat is a new application, diesel motors to the surface props. So there's a lot of things you have to look at, little problems that you try and solve before you make the run.
Now, if this seems like an unlikely adventure for the son of a president, it shouldn't. Michael Reagan has been involved in boating for 17 years and is a former powerboat champion. Reagan, who is also a member of the U.S. Olympic Fundraising Committee, says he wants to set the record, but his main goal in this race is to raise money through various sponsors for U.S. athletes.
So we're the only member of 149 member nations of the International Olympic Committee that's not funded by our government, but funded by the people of this country. And we have to raise a lot of money in order to put our athletes in Los Angeles and Yugoslavia for the Summer and Winter Olympics.
With that in mind, the testing of Reagan's boats continues in hopes that Wednesday, when he leaves New Orleans, he can make it to St. Louis in 20 or 21 hours. That's about 5 hours or so under the old record. And according to the president's son, the trip upriver is a treacherous one.
This is like the 1,001st attempt to reset this record that goes back to 1870. There have only been 12 records in 1,000 attempts. It's a very treacherous river. There's been 8 people killed up north in the last month and a half in boating-related accidents. And literally every person in that boat, both boats, are literally putting their lives on the line to raise this money.
Reagan has had charges leveled against him that he is grandstanding, doing all this and using his name for publicity. But he says that just isn't the case here.
I'm using my name here to do something for somebody else, and that to me cannot be a bad thing.
Is it hard being the president's son?
It was hard being the governor's son. It was hard being an actor's son. You know, people forget my mother's Jane Wyman. I have a mother, and I think that's the worst thing. I feel so bad because she is such a great, fine lady, and she's got a great series going now on TV, and you almost feel bad. Like I can't invite her to St. Louis to be at the finish line because having my mom and my dad there, the press would have a field day or bring her here to the start. And people do. They forget that you have a mother, and it really makes me feel badly sometimes because to me she's as equally famous as he is. He's president of the United States, but she's making a better living.
On Wednesday, after all the testing is finished, there is a fundraising luncheon in New Orleans where Vice President George Bush has come to wish Michael Reagan the best in the race he is about to run. Meanwhile, down at the site of the start of the race, crowds of people are everywhere. Reporters and photographers from all over the country are here, and the start of the race is just minutes away. Michael Reagan says goodbye to his wife and son Cameron and is ready to join his crew.
Now, for the start of the race, the boats behind me will leave the dock and go down the river about a half a mile, turn around and start coming up. And as they cross the line right here, the clock will start for the beginning of the race.
In seconds, the boats are off. Reagan is now in the boat that was supposed to be used as a backup, an offshore power boat with 3 outboard engines. The big diesel power boat, which had all the problems during testing, is now being used as the backup boat. For the next 20 hours, Reagan and his crew will be fighting exhaustion and the river as they race to St. Louis at average speeds of about 50 miles an hour. There will be occasional stops along the way for fuel, but for the most part, this is what they will be doing through the night and much of the next day, racing against the clock.
22 hours later in St. Louis, Missouri, Michael Reagan has still not crossed the finish line. There has been trouble downriver. One of his boats has blown a transmission, the other one ran out of gas. Now, while he hasn't made it to St. Louis in the 21 hours he had hoped for, there is still time to break the world record.
Then, 25 hours and 11 minutes after Reagan and his crew left New Orleans, they crossed the finish line in St. Louis. The crowd watching is jubilant, and so is Michael Reagan. He's broken the world record by more than an hour.
I feel really good, you know, and it's for everybody.
And now that he's raised the money and broken the record, Reagan is looking forward to a benefit dinner with his father a few hours later.
Yeah, things I have to do to have dinner with my dad.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
That night, at a $250 a plate dinner to raise money for the Olympics and to honor August Bush III for his support of the U.S. Olympic Committee, Michael Reagan is applauded for his efforts. Now, at a formal dinner when your father is president, sometimes addressing him can be a problem.
Do I call you Dad or Mr. President?
Hey, you.
It's really a pleasure to be here this evening and be part of all this. Of course, we had to do a lot of things just to have dinner with you, Dad. We had to drive 1,027 miles because, you see, I've lived under Reaganomics longer than anybody here in the building.
Well, when all the laughing was over, the president himself summed up the importance of what his son had done and what it means to U.S. athletes.
Mike, I'm proud of you, but not just proud of what you did, but proud because you did it for the cause that brings us together here tonight. I don't know how you're still awake, but a lot of effort went into that boat ride, and it was for a great effort, the effort of the Olympic Committee. Whether you've gotten a record or not, I think all of us here hope that other Americans will emulate you and give them of themselves in behalf of our country and our Olympic team.
And for Michael Reagan, this day has been one he will long remember, raising money for U.S. Olympic hopefuls and crossing the finish line in record time, making him the champion of the mighty Mississippi River. For millions of Americans, this is a pretty familiar sight. A man saying goodbye to his wife as he leaves home for a business trip. For the Eldies of New Orleans, this is a scene that happens several times a year. Joe Eldie says goodbye to his wife, Marty, and leaves for his job, a job that keeps him away from home for a month and a half at a time. Joe is a Panama Canal ship pilot. A day later, and more than 1,000 miles from home, Joe is up early, ready to board a freighter in Panama City, Panama, to guide this vessel through one of the most historic waterways in the world. As Joe steps on deck, he will assume authority of the ship when it begins its 8-hour journey through the Panama Canal. His assignment on this day is to bring a 592-foot Lykes freighter through the canal from the Pacific side to the Caribbean or Atlantic side 50 miles away. Joe's first obstacle is the Miraflores locks. These are the first of 2 sets of locks near the Pacific side of the canal. In these locks, the ship will be raised about 70 to 80 feet, depending on the tide, to reach the level of the water in the main body of the canal. In this diagram, you can see the difference in the height of the ocean entrance and the canal. Now, getting a ship into a small space like this is a critical time for a pilot.
Because of the tight, the confined waters to maneuver in, and the current, there's a very strong current around the sea entrance.
Once the ship is close enough to the entrance of the locks, small boats come out with cables to attach onto the bow and stern of the ship. These are connected to locomotives on the walls of the locks to guide the ship in. This freighter will have 4 locomotives called mules pulling it through. Larger boats can require a half dozen or more depending on the size. Once the ship is in, the locks begin to fill with water and the freighter is quickly raised to the level of water in the next chamber. Now, all of this is controlled from a building at the locks filled with equipment that looks as if it were designed by some modern-day scientist. But all this technology was developed around 1904 when the canal was being built. When the ship gets into the main body of the canal, you begin to see some of the jungle and terrain that make up this Latin American country. It would seem now that the hard part of the journey through the canal is over, but there are other obstacles ahead. Joe says as he pilots a ship, there are always things to watch out for and think about, especially keeping away from passing ships. The canal is always crowded. One of the most dangerous parts of the canal is a section called Gilliard Cut. This has been trouble ever since work on the canal began. It's an area of solid rock and would often collapse during frequent rock slides while construction was going on.
Since the canal's completion, Gilliard Cut has provided a number of other problems. There have been numerous rock slides since, the worst being in 1915, when an earth slide blocked the canal for more than 7 months.
And for modern-day pilots like Joe, this area still holds some danger for a number of reasons.
It is more narrow, it's only 500 feet wide, and also the sides of the canal is rocks. So that if you hit the side, the danger of holding the ship and sinking it is possible.
The canal is financed through the collection of tolls according to a ship's weight. The going rate is about $2 per ton. Now on a ship the size we're on, the rate will be about $20,000 to $25,000 to pass through. The most ever paid by a ship was more than $89,000 by the Queen Elizabeth II in 1980. The least amount ever paid for a toll was 36 cents by a man who swam the canal in 1928.
The Panama Canal is one of the most important waterways in the world. Before it was built, a ship traveling from San Francisco to New York had to travel 13,000 miles around South America. The canal cuts that distance to only about 5,000 miles.
For centuries, men have dreamed of putting a canal across the Isthmus of Panama. As early as 1524, King Charles V of Spain ordered a survey to determine the feasibility of putting a waterway in Panama. However, those plans never came to fruition. Then about 3 centuries later, in 1880, the French became the first to actually begin digging on a waterway here. After 20 years of work, financial failure, and disease, they finally gave up. That brought in the Americans. In 1904, after the Panamanian Revolution, they acquired the rights from France to pick up the digging where they left off, and the Panama Canal became a reality.
That reality, though, took 10 long and costly years for this country to complete. It is not known for sure just how many people died from disease while cutting through the mosquito-infested Panamanian jungle, but there were thousands of them, mostly black laborers from the British West Indies recruited by the Americans. The project cost the United States about $380 million and was considered important enough to warrant a presidential visit by Teddy Roosevelt. At the time, this waterway was a very controversial issue, and today the case is still the same. Since the canal was built, America had an agreement to operate it and control a strip of land known as the Canal Zone. That all changed with ratification of the controversial Panama Canal Treaties in 1978. The Panamanians now control the land which they call the canal area, and by the year 2000 will be running the canal itself, eventually phasing out the 1,600 Americans who still work here, including pilots like Joe. But he and others are not worried about losing their jobs soon.
Right now we have only 4 Panamanian pilots and 2 in training. This is going to increase, but it's a slow process. I would imagine